What is up, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Collection Commentary. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at this unbelievable custom Larevo knives mini Tribeca. Now, there's a lot that's special that's going on with this knife, so we are going to do the standard features and flaws and story time sections to the video, but there's going to be a couple other elements that we introduce because this particular knife isn't your general everyday carry. Now, with that said, let's go ahead and jump into the features and flaws. First things first, let's go ahead and review the materials on this knife. So, the first thing to note is that we do have Vegas Forge Sanmai Damascus all the way around the knife. It's going to be present on the blade, the back bar, and the clip. You can follow Vegas Forge on Instagram here, and they do a lot of great work. They've got a lot of interesting patterns and designs that they're always working on and exposing on their Instagram, so that's definitely super cool. Go ahead and check them out. The next material that we have is this blasted zirconium, and this has a really soft but yet still textured feel to it, and it's been done very well. There's a lot of zirconium going around in the market right now, and I've seen it done well, I've seen it done less well, and you know, it really can come in a series of different finishes. On something like an Arucus here, you do have a softer, smoother zirconium finish, and then on something like this custom Gavco Tiger, you have a zirconium finish that's more similar to the bolster on this, where it almost feels a little bit dry, but it has a really good texture to it. It feels smooth, but it also gives you grip, which is really nice. Of course, you have titanium liners on this knife as well as titanium hardware. Nothing unusual there. And then finally, the most controversial material on this knife is going to be ivory. Now, this in particular is walrus ivory, not African elephant ivory. And I think that it's really important that we discuss ivory and that I talk about my feelings on the material and why I felt comfortable purchasing this knife with ivory. Now, I don't want to waste anybody's time that doesn't really care, so I am going to make a separate video where I talk about my opinions on ivory, why I thought it was worth buying ivory on this knife, and just the story of kind of how the ivory came to be on this knife and everything like that. So there will be a link down below to that video as well as a link at the end of this video, so if you care to watch that, you can either pause and go watch it now, or you can watch it at the end. Doesn't matter to me, but yeah, that's everything that I have to say in this video on the material. Now, moving on, I want to talk about the aesthetics of the knife. There's a lot of really special things going on here, and this is a point where it kind of deviates from the traditional videos that I do, where I don't really view this piece so much as an EDC as I do a collector piece, and making that distinction is very, very difficult. And I also want to make another separate video where I kind of talk about my feelings on that. I think the difference between a collector piece and a usable EDC is entirely personal. I'm sure there are some people that would look at something like a Thorburn and say that that's a collector piece, but I use my Thorburn all the time. And somebody might even say something like that about the Shirogorov or even much cheaper knives. Everybody's kind of level of safe queen versus EDC versus knife they abuse, like for me, you know, maybe a Kershaw or something. We all have varying levels of what we feel comfortable with and the price points that we feel comfortable with and stuff like that. So for me, this is the only knife that I own that I would distinguish as more a collector piece than an EDC. I'm going to leave the rest of that discussion for the other video, so again, there will be another link to that video down below, as well as at the end of this video, so feel free to check that out if you care about my opinions at all on that. Now, the last thing I will say on that topic with this knife is that even though I do view it as a collector piece, I do carry the knife and I will cut things with it. So, you know, a big thing for me in my collection is no safe queens. And so this knife goes in the pocket and it comes out with me. It comes to work with me. It gets handed to people. And I treat it basically like any other knife. The reason that I'm making the distinction is because the way that I feel that the knife should be criticized is different, because the fact that I view it as a collector piece means that there are aspects of the knife that I think matter more, and aspects of the knife that I think matter less, that may be different if this was a knife that I considered to be like a general use EDC. So go ahead and watch that video if you're interested in that distinction being made at all, but I just wanted to give you all a heads up as to why this video might come off differently than other videos that I've done, because I'm going to discuss some different things and put importance on some different things as well. I'm going to try to keep this one as short as I can, but I have to admit this video is probably going to get a little bit long. There's a lot going on with this knife, so I'm going to jump into it. So as far as the aesthetics go, the overall shape and design of this knife is very interesting. So Jason Overall, he is the maker behind Larevo knives. I'll see if I can show you the logo here. It's kind of blended into the San Mai Damascus. But you can just barely make out the outline of the Larevo Knives logo there. So this model is the mini Tribeca. The full-size Tribeca is rather large. I did handle the full-size Tribeca at Blade Show, and it was even... it was probably right around the size of the Shiro. A little bit thicker, maybe a little bit shorter, but in general, this was kind of the size difference between the mini and the full-size. That's a fair comparison, I think, based on my memory. But so this knife has a really interesting shape. It's got a lot going on. I really like the Tanto blade, which we'll talk about later. And I really like how everything kind of tapers to a point, no matter which direction you're looking, whether that's the flipper tab, the tail end of the knife, or the front end of the knife. Everything kind of tapers off, or even right here by the index finger cutout. Everything kind of tapers to a point, and it just it looks really good. I really appreciate that. Obviously, aesthetics are going to be something that are hard to judge. So, you know, if you flat out don't like the look of this knife, it is what it is. Everybody has different opinions about design and everything like that, which is totally fine. But another thing that I really, really like about the Tribeca model particularly is that he does the clips in a shape, the 3D milled clips in a shape that matches the actual shape of the knife. And I did just say 3D milled. This is steel, not titanium. I don't actually know if this is milled or if this is handwork done. I actually think pretty much everything Jason does is handwork. So this is actually probably steel that's been stock removed all the way down to this lovely shape here. Try to show that off to you a little bit. But as you can see, the clip tapers to the same shape as the tail end of the knife. And I'm going to do my best to show you the contouring actually matches as well. So you can see there's a three-dimensional dip here, followed by a three-dimensional dip here in the ivory. So not only is the actual outline or the profile of the clip matched in the knife and vice versa, but also the contouring, which is something that I can really appreciate. The amount of work and effort that went into matching those up is really impressive. The clip could have been done at a slightly better angle this way to kind of match the point a little bit more, but that's totally fine. But I just really, really find it spectacular that the contouring matches all the way around in both the clip and the tail end of the knife. It's really, really spectacular look. So moving on, something else that I really, really appreciate about this knife is one of the first things I noticed when I picked it up at the show is that, sorry, there's a little bit of hair sticking out of the back bar here, is that the back bar is actually raised. So as you can see there, you can actually see the etch of the Damascus, you know, on the side of the steel because it's raised. And that's something that I really appreciate because here, you can especially see it here. So it's completely contoured to the knife, but then it's raised along this edge here so that you can actually see the etch. And I really appreciate that because a lot of times what makers will do with these backspacers is, you know, they'll use a really exotic material like Damascus or Damascus, and it's always super impressive, but when you actually look down the spine of the knife, all you get is this wavy pattern that you would see, for example, in the spine of a blade. Now, while that still looks beautiful, and it's still something that I can absolutely appreciate, and I would rather have that than, you know, like a plain piece of titanium or something like that, it's really special to me that this one is raised so that I can actually see the pattern etched into the side of the Damascus instead of just the spine of it. So that was a really cool design choice, and I'm really appreciative of that. Obviously, all of the Tribecas have this done in the design, so ones that don't use Damascus aren't necessarily the same level of feature, but that was something that I really put a lot of emphasis on when I was trying to decide what I was going to purchase at Blade. I really, really appreciated the fact that that was another little detail that just seemed really smart and really excellent. I do love that the tang of the knife blends with the knife when closed. This is something that is both fairly common and uncommon depending on the kinds of makers that you're interested in, but I always prefer it when the tang has kind of been shaped to the contour of the frame itself, instead of doing something like Shirogorov where it just doesn't match at all, right? It's completely recessed and a completely different shape. Even on something like this Gavko, right, it's recessed, it's a different shape. So this is something that I definitely enjoy on many knives, on basically any liner lock or frame lock. It's something that is found on Thorburns. You can see right here it's completely contoured. And I just think that that's something that should be thought about when makers are designing knives. I've always really appreciated it when the everything kind of just matches and blends and you have this continuous form. I really appreciate that. The next thing that I want to mention in terms of aesthetics is just the awesome chemical green anodization on the liners. The light that I have set up isn't quite doing them the amount of justice they deserve. But be sure to follow me on Instagram at tovarishworks to see some really, really well done kind of high definition pictures of this knife, and you can get a good idea of how spectacular the liners have been done. Now, the liners are what initially caught my eye at Blade Show. That was, I think, the first thing that came out of my mouth when I picked up the knife was, oh my god, look at this green. You know, green is not the easiest color to get out of titanium. Some makers do it very well. Obviously, Gavko has done so here, and other makers don't do it quite as well. But it was because of this sort of polished finish that these liners have and the way the light dances off of them that really made it stand out. I've never quite seen a green just like this before. And I immediately told Jason that it was one of my favorite parts of the knife. Now, I've had the knife for a little bit now, a little over, oh gosh, it's been a month, hasn't it? And you can see with hand oils, you'll get purple shades coming through, which for anybody that follows the channel, you know that purple is my jam. So getting, if any color was going to come through with hand oils, getting purple to do so is definitely perfect for me. But there was really something about this green that completely set this knife apart from anything that I had seen before. And it just functions so well against the deep gray of the Damascus and the zirconium. It looks really good up against the ivory. You know, green and white is kind of always a good combination in my opinion. And so these liners are just really mesmerizing and really special compared to other titanium anodized liners that I've seen. They're just really on another level in terms of the polish, the way the light plays off of them, and the deep toxic green that really comes out. You know, I love this Gavko and it's really awesome, but you know, it is kind of like a matte green, which I appreciate. A big part of why I like Gavko's is the matte finishes that he's able to pull off. It's very unique and very special, but it is nice to have something that's kind of reflective and bright and really just different in that way. So super awesome liners. Now, continuing to talk about the liners, I want to get into some of the deeper details about the aesthetics of this knife that really set it apart for me from everything else that I picked up at Blade. So far we've talked about some of the general aesthetics. It's all kind of personal opinion stuff. And what I'm about to get into now is a little bit more detailed, and even if you're not a fan of the design or anything like that, I think everything that I'm going to say from this point is something that you can appreciate from the maker's perspective or from a standpoint of craftsmanship. So let's get into some of the awesome details here. So right here you can see, And I know my voice is fading in and out because I keep looking up to see what I'm showing you on the camera away from the microphone, but bear with me. What you can see here is that the liners are completely matched up against the back bar, and it's completely flat straight across, right? So the liners are matched up nicely. Everything's a nice smooth fit and finish. Everything fits together very well. But the point that I'm trying to make is that it's flat straight across. So the liners are just done in a flat manner. But then as you get up here towards the end of the back bar, you can see that a 45-degree angle chamfer begins to emerge into the liner, only where it's not meeting the back bar. So what this means is that up against the back bar, you have a nice, clean, continuous angle all the way across the rear of the knife. But when you actually get into an area where your finger might be rubbing inside the liners, everything's been completely smoothed out. Now, this transition is done in such a professional manner. It's completely even from side to side. And it's pleasurable to feel, and it was a spectacular point of interest for me that I really appreciated that Jason took the time to chamfer just this area so that it both looked correct and proper against the back bar with a nice continuous angle, but also felt great and looked great as you transitioned out of the back bar. You can also see right here the chamfer tapers back away so that as you get to the top of the knife and you again have the zirconium or material liner, blade liner material, it continues to be that flat, continuous flat edge. And so the chamfer is only in this region where it wouldn't interfere with the aesthetics of the knife. And I just... whew, it makes me way more excited than it should. I just, there's not a lot of knives where I've seen that kind of effort put into something as small as that. You know, you do get on the Gavcos and the Shiragorovs, you get these nice little cutouts so that there's a spot for your finger to land. But again, everything is still just kind of flat, even on something as amazing as a Thorburn. Everything's just kind of flat across, even up here. You can kind of catch your finger on it. And so to have it aesthetically correct with the continuous flat degree where all the materials are meeting, but to take the time to lightly chamfer the interior only in the areas where your fingers are going to go, it's absolutely spectacular. I feel like I've rambled about that too much, so I'm going to go ahead and move on. But continuing to talk about chamfering, there's a smooth and widening chamfer on the zirconium bolsters with a complex grind in the width. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. And this kind of goes all the way around the knife. It's easiest to see in the zirconium, but it exists in the ivory as well. So let's go ahead and take a look. What I mean here is that instead of having a continuous 45-degree chamfer all the way around the bolster and scale, it's actually a fluctuating depth of chamfer, and so when you look at the knife like this, you are able to see the outline of what I'm talking about. So you've got thick chamfer here. You can see it's about that thick. I'll do it with my pinky. And then it thins out when you get up here. So starts very thick, nice wide chamfer, very comfortable, provides good contouring. And then as you get up here where your hand is actually not going to be resting, the aesthetics take over, and you get this really light chamfer all the way around this edge, which keeps everything transitioning well, keeps that flat contour that I was talking about earlier together. And you can see as we actually transition to the Z-axis, the chamfer grind is wide here. Then it begins to taper. And you have chamfer, it's full chamfer to a light flat edge, transferring to a thick flat edge with a light chamfer, all the way through here. And then right when you get to this corner, all of the edges meet and you get one flat edge through here, and then right here it starts to widen again and you get two bevels again, and then it widens all the way through here to the widest point, which is where your finger is going to go, so that it's got really great contouring. Now, that is just really spectacular work. You guys have to remember, this whole knife is being done by hand. The amount of attention to detail, the level of understanding of three-dimensionality to make this happen and to make it look good, feel good, and have good fit and finish, really, really spectacular. It's just a really, really fantastic use of contouring and of chamfering and of understanding the lines of how everything comes together, being able to go from flat to chamfer to flat to just flat to flat, and having that transition be almost invisible unless it's pointed out to you is really, really spectacular. Now, it is harder to show in the ivory, but this does continue on. You've got this thick chamfer all the way through here. Trying to show you. Comes all the way around to this edge, and then of course you have these kind of indentated contours down here towards the tail end. And then that transitions back, up and around, and to here as well. So a lot of what you're seeing in the zirconium bolster is taking place in the ivory as well. It's just very difficult to get the ivory to show it in this lighting up against the camera. Continuing to talk about the chamfering, if we look at the internals here, similar to what we saw on this transition on the back here, it exists on the inside of the knife as well. So you can see we have the 90-degree angle. With it is rounded, so this is completely soft and smooth. I can rub my finger here. There's no irritation, there's no heat coming from this. So even though it is flat edge, it has been ever so lightly kind of just sanded down so that this is nice and smooth, and isn't a complete 90-degree angle, that's kind of sharp on your hand. But anyway, as we move up, you can see it is the 90 degrees, and then as we get up here, we're introducing another chamfer, 45 degree, that goes up to here. It's on this side as well. So 90 degree, transition to chamfer right at the tip of my nail. 45 degree chamfer up through here. Of course, that gives you nice contour to get your finger in there to disengage the lock bar. But then you can see, just as we get up to the tip of this point, the chamfer is laid away and it transitions back to that 90-degree angle that continues around through the tang and gives us this awesome look there. So just the amazing contouring on this knife absolutely boggles my mind. It is so far beyond anything else that I've handled. I did get to try a lot of really amazing things at Blade Show. There certainly were other knives that were of this caliber, but they were few and far between, and it's little details like this that really pushed me over the edge to pull the trigger on the Larevo versus other knives from other makers that I had expected to be more interested in. But continuing on, I really want to talk about my absolute favorite part of this knife. It's the, well, on any other knife, what I'm about to say is typically the least interesting and least important aspect of the knife. So much so that on a Thorburn, it's almost completely an afterthought, which is the hardware, the screws. You can see on a Thorburn, the screws just kind of end up there. They don't blend into the material at all. There's nothing special going on. On a lot of knives, you will get screws that are anodized to match the knife. You see we've got blue here. We've got gold here to match the copper. So, typically hardware is just something that's not thought about as much on knives. And that's completely not true of this knife. The thing that really blew my mind, and the thing that absolutely sold me on this knife and really made me pull the trigger and made me pull my friends aside and say, oh my gosh, you got to look at this, is the hardware on this knife. So let's go ahead and talk about that. You can see here the pivot is a nice green with kind of a gold overtone. And then it has this beautiful blurple pivot collar. You can see how the light dances off of the pivot collar. It's so incredibly well crafted. But what's really special, and it's going to be really hard to show you, I might need a flashlight, we'll see. Well, maybe not, is that the screws are anodized on the inside green, and around the edge, around the rim, is blue/blurple. Meaning that each individual screw has been dual color anodized to match the pivot with the pivot collar. This level of detail the light's going to blow it out, I think. Hopefully you can see what I'm talking about. This level of detail makes me ecstatic. It is literally my favorite thing about this knife. It was the feature that absolutely made this worth it to me. If you were going to put that much effort and that much detail into a tiny screw that 9 out of 10 people who pick up your knife are never ever going to notice, they might just pick it up and go, oh, it's blue, or oh, it's green, and move on. If you're going to put that much effort into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tiny little screws so that they match the other features on your knife, I'm sold. I'm sold. That's it. It's that simple. That is the kind of detail that sets a good knife maker apart from an absolute master. And I absolutely love that feature. It's my favorite thing. Continuing to move on, the lock side of the blade is really great in Sanmai. You know, the Sanmai on this side looks good, but it almost you would be easily mistaken to just think this is just Damascus and not quite Sanmai. But when you flip it over, you do get this kind of dual etch where you have some flat aspects of the blade, and then you also get the Damascus rippled in there as well. I just really like how it kind of travels up the shape of the knife. It exposes this core pretty well, and I definitely prefer the lock side in terms of how the Sanmai looks. Another thing that I thought was really cool about the knife is that I love the thick core on the clip. You can see the core on the back bar and the core on the blade are both acid etched, but the core on the clip still comes through as silver, which I thought gave it a really special look and really helped it come to life and give it a little bit more uniqueness among the rest of the knife. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about with just the aesthetics in a pure aesthetic sense, and the other thing that really set me over the edge with this one compared to many other knives, is this artistic version of a relief cut. So you can see here, basically on every other knife, relief cuts are just little rectangles. It's pretty normal. Rectangle. Could literally pick up any of these. Rectangle. So you can see rectangular relief cuts are super common, but Jason took the time to do these 3 matching half circles cut out of the lock bar, and it just looks great. I mean, it looks like a design feature. It looks like it was done on purpose. It makes aesthetic and artistic use out of something that on every other knife is purely mechanical, purely functional, and it takes something that you have to do for the function of the knife, and it makes it worthwhile. It makes it something that is aesthetically pleasing, and something that really adds to the knife instead of just being something that you have to do to make the knife function. And of course, the lock bar has no lock stick or anything like that. It's not negatively impacted by the design choice at all. And he just did such a fantastic job. There are a few other knives that I've come across where I've seen sort of an artistic touch to the relief, which the relief cut rather, which is great, and I encourage all makers to do that. But you can really tell that based on everything I've said so far, with the screws and the three-dimensional chamfering and taking the time to just really put all that extra effort in here is really accentuated by the fact that even the relief cut has an awesome look to it. I'll just give you one final look at that. And he just did such a good job with it. It's contoured. It doesn't catch your finger at all. It's just really, really well done. And so that's going to wrap up the aesthetic aspect of this video. You guys can tell that I'm completely smitten with this knife, and I hope that, the first bit of what I talked about with the general design and everything, I understand that that's completely personal preference, and some people are going to hate this knife just based on the way that it looks. But I hope that halfway through, once I got to some of these smaller details, that even if you hate green and blue, you can still appreciate how amazing these screws are. Or even if you dislike the green liners, maybe you can appreciate the awesome relief cut. Those are objective things, in that even if you don't like the way that they look, objectively, they clearly show the level of craftsmanship that Jason has, and the attention and the detail, the sweat, blood, and tears, the hours that went into this knife. They're very visible in those senses, so that I hope that you can appreciate that as much as I do. Now, let's move on to some of the other features and flaws and actually talk about this knife as a knife and as kind of an EDC. So it does have surprisingly great ergos despite how thick it is. This knife is remarkably thick. Let's actually go ahead and line it up to the Paramilitary 2. I did say this is more of a collector piece. I don't think the specs matter quite as much on this knife, but just so you guys have kind of an idea of how big this thing is. It is on the smaller side. It isn't incredibly small. It's not quite like as thin as the Gavco Small Mako, but you can see it is just about the same length. So it is on the smaller side, but of course it does have the word mini in its title, so that's completely reasonable. However, the big difference is that it is quite thick. I believe it is the thickest knife I own, and it is easily as thick as a Bodega. Maybe it's not quite as thick as a full-size Bodega, but it's close. So you can see here that it's a good 30% thicker, if not more, than the PM2, and it is a smaller knife. So it is rather thick, which brings me to the next aspect of it, which is that it really feels like a tank, and it's really heavy. So heavy, in fact, that when I hand it to friends, they're like, really? Like, this is really heavy. And I'm like, yeah, it is. There's no milling going on here. There's no internal milling. As you can see, it's just all flatness in there. And the materials are not particularly light to begin with. So yes, it is going to feel very heavy. It is going to feel kind of like a tank. And it is quite thick. Sorry, I keep getting distracted by little bits of lint and stuff. But it is quite thick. So it feels really great in the hand. But if you were looking for like a light EDC, something to, if the other knives that you were looking at were things like Shirogorov Neons, then I have to recommend not getting something like this. That said, with this being, like I said before, more of a collector piece and everything like that, I can appreciate the weight, and I really like the way that it feels in the hand. However, it is a little bit too heavy for my pocket, so it is something that I only carry when I'm wearing a belt. Now, the knife is off-center, but it was like this at the table, and it's not too bad. But that is something that you will find with, handmade customs, is that they're not always going to be perfectly centered, as that is rather difficult to manage. I would honestly say that that's the only quote-unquote flaw with this knife, and yeah, everything else I consider a feature. But yeah, so another thing that this knife has is a finger choil, which works excellently, and I'm very, very excited about that. It even has a bit of a safety relief. It's not quite sharpened all the way to a crazy point. It does have this bit of kind of a tapering to it, and that does mean that you can hold the knife like this, and it is quite filling. It feels very good, and then you can of course choke up on the knife and get into the finger choil, and then it feels really, really good, and really, really filling in the hand. So that's definitely something that I can appreciate. I really, really like it when a knife has a finger choil, and I like it even more when that finger choil has been kind of taken care of to the point where it's really comfortable to use, and it's not something that you feel risky kind of getting your finger up in there with. The action on this knife is smooth and excellent, but it also is unavoidably ratchety due to the deep etch on the Damascus. What this means is that you kind of get this through the knife, and it feels almost a little bit grindy, even though it's remarkably smooth. But you guys can see here, it does drop shut very well, very smoothly. It is running on bearings, and it is smoother than my Erucus. Speaking of Erucus, when I showed him this knife when I was at Blade Show, he and his buddy Arnold both kind of looked at me and were like, ugh, and they kind of did this with the knife, and oh yeah, and they told me that you can't get rid of that with this type of Damascus with such a deep etch, and so I do not hold it against Jason for it being slightly ratchety, and quite frankly, the full-size Tribeca that Jason had was using Damasteel, which, if you are unfamiliar, is incredibly smooth. And that knife actually had an action that was on par with the Grimsmo Rask. The first time I ever managed to interact with the Rask was at Blade Show. And it is one of the few knives that closes against gravity, meaning that if you were holding the knife at this angle and you shut it, that it would swing all the way up into the handle despite gravity wanting to hold it straight down. And the full-size Tribeca was operating just like that. It was closing against gravity. You can actually see it in my Larevo video from Blade Show, which I'll link to at the end of this video. And so I'm completely confident in Jason's ability to create an action that's not only spectacular, but quite frankly, world class. And so it was nice to have Erucus and Arnold explain to me that this is something that's just a result of the material. And so I'm totally comfortable with that. It still runs incredibly smooth. It's something that I've kind of gotten used to, and it gives the knife a little bit of character. So that's definitely something that I'm comfortable with, but was something worth noting. I will say that the jimping on this knife is too much. You've got jimping here on the tab, jimping here on the spine. If you just kind of glide across it on the top, like the surface, it's fairly smooth. It feels very good. But if you get to the edges, or if you dig down into it, it gets a little bit sharp. It feels almost a little bit sandpapery. So it's not too bad, but this could have had a little bit more done to it, maybe with along the edges or something. I think it would have negatively impacted the aesthetics. And again, it is fairly smooth, especially when you're only brushing it. But if you get down in there, or you're kind of running along the sides here, it can feel a little bit harsh against the skin. And then I gotta say, the Tonto shape is useful, and it's not inhibiting, as it is fairly tame. Sometimes Tontos are really aggressive, and you get this really sharp angle, and they don't always come to a point. You know, Tontos get up here, and then they're straight back all the way back, and kind of makes it tough to pierce with a Tonto. And a lot of times the Tontos end up with the thick convex grinds at the edge of them, or something like the Wii 604. You can see this is kind of a bad example. This does pierce fairly well, but it gets very thick behind the Tonto and everything like that, which is not happening with the Larevo. It actually kind of thins out here towards the tip, making it a fairly good piercer. This little Tonto edge is going to be great for getting into a package, and then of course the edge is not completely just like this. There's a little bit of a curve, just ever so slightly, in the belly of the blade. And overall, it's one of the most useful Tonto shapes that I've ever come across, and I think that it matches the knife very well. So that's going to go ahead and do it for this one, guys. Be sure to stick around and go watch the videos for how I feel about ivory, as well as how I feel about a collector piece versus a general EDC. If you would like to see other videos with all of these amazing knives, be sure to subscribe. Follow me on Instagram at tovarishworks to see awesome pictures of some of the detailed features that these knives have, including the aesthetics that I went over with this Larevo. And if you guys would like to send me a lovely loaner, I would really appreciate it. And you can do so by emailing me at tovarishworks@gmail.com. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and I will see you next time. This video was made in association with KnifeInformer.com. Head on over to Knife Informer for all of your blade-related needs, including reviews, comparisons, stats, and more.